Project Management for Healthcare Managers. Planning. Change Control and Project Audit. HCMO 375. During the planning phase, there are activities that identify what processes are used to make sure the project itself is well managed. Another activity tracks any engineering or technical changes that need to be managed as well. Asking the question, how do we make sure that we're staying on track, is usually answered with the project audit. The change control processes are all the activities to be able to make changes to the project baseline. When the project has completed the planning phase and is starting into execute, monitor, and control, if there's any changes to schedule, budget, or scope that will affect the outcome, they need to be documented and approved through the change control process. Configuration management is about how do we identify and track technical or engineering changes. Some examples include software version numbers or any sort of engineering changes that occur on airlines. Configuration management and version tracking need to be planned out before the execution phase. Project auditing includes documents that PMO has as standards and verifying the process and documents to make sure things are staying on track. A document control process needs to be incorporated during the status, issues, and change management processes during the execution phase. A specific approach on how that is going to occur needs to be defined before execution, before we start working on the project. Generally speaking, when baseline changes occur, such as schedule, budget, or scope, these changes need to be documented and approved. The first thing that happens is that the change is identified. What are the steps to identify a change? Typically, you would see a change identified during issue management, and then the resolution or status is reported through that. How is the impact assessed? When do we need to decide that this change affects baseline, schedules, budget, or scope? Deciding the processes to handle is done by the project manager or a specific team that handles change process. The sponsor is always involved at some point, especially in the steps to approve budget, schedule, and changes in resources. It's up to the project team to identify the action and the approval. Taking the documents that have been produced for change management and then executing those documents as part of the process. For the approval of the change, there may be some question on who needs to approve. Is it only the sponsor? In some cases, where there is a budgeting change, the financial manager may need to be involved. And what are those steps to document and execute? It is really good to know how the organizational process assets are put together, like having an electronic database or an updatable SharePoint site. Documents and execute are how the PMO organizes documents within an organization. Another thing that needs to be planned is configuration management. Configuration management is highly dependent on the product and service of the industry. An example I can give is airplane engineering changes. When I was working at Boeing, the engineers would make changes as the planes would go through the line. And sometimes these changes would occur before the plane had gotten to that stage of manufacturing. These would be called green streak changes, and the only changes that would need to be documented in the system before the plans actually get drawn out. A blue streak change is a change that needs to be done right away to be able to be included in the final result. Nothing needs to be torn apart or taken out, but a change needs to be made in order to align to the schedule, and it's done at the same time. A red streak change is done when something is actually torn out and replaced. Engineering has made a change so that the final product gets done correctly. Red streak changes usually occur if there's a problem with safety or quality. In the software industry, changes are typically versions. Packets are groups of software that have specific numbering systems that identify the current level of maturity. Typically, major changes will have whole number changes, and incremental changes will have decimal number changes. Typically, software changes due to enhancement or a bug fix, which something that needs to be fixed in the program. How these software changes are documented or identified really has an impact on the success of the project. And it's hard to describe all the different ways of software versioning happenings among the different software companies in the industry. This just needs to be part of the project management plan for that specific project and industry. Another example is how do changes in house plans occur. In the construction industry, engineering changes need to be identified and reviewed, not only by sponsors or customers of the project, but also by those doing the inspections. The process for making changes in house building plans are part of configuration management. Configuration management is highly dependent on the type of industry. Some industries do not even have configuration management because there's no configurations or versions to have to deal with. During configuration management tracking, we typically see some sort of identification. What does this configuration look like? What does a specific version or engineering change look like? And then what is the status of it? Is it started? Is it in the plan? Is it complete? Has it been included in the project? Documenting configuration identification and the current status of the version or engineering change. And does there need to be any testing to verify its form, function, and use? Is there any test plans that need to be consulted? And does QA need to come up with a plan to see if the overall function is working well? These are the types of things you see across the board with any configuration management, regardless of industry. What is a change? What is the status of the change? And how do we verify that the change is doing what it's supposed to do? And then finally, how do we keep things on track? How do we make sure on a project level that things are being done the way that they're supposed to? This is typically done by audit. Usually it is the role of the PMO to verify that if the right documents are in place and that the processes are being followed. Sometimes project managers will perform self-audit. They'll go through a checklist and figure out, am I doing what needs to be doing? Do I have the right documents in place? There needs to be an audit against a standard. Standard documents and templates need to be established by the organization and determine whether best practices are being followed. So in this section, we covered change control and configuration management. Change control is the process to be able to make changes to baseline and account for those changes so that the deliverable or requirement gets to the customer in an updated fashion. Configuration management is specific due to different industries and how to update the configuration and track the changes. Project audits is how we verify that projects are on track.